Hello, viewers. Today we have with us Audrey Magee. Audrey Magee needs no introduction whatsoever to book lovers. She's the author of two well-known books. The first, The Undertaking, which was shortlisted and nominated for various literary awards. And the second is The Colony, which was longlisted for the prestigious Booker Prize 2022. And this is the book we'll be discussing today with Audrey Magee herself. Thank you so much, Audrey, for joining us today.
You know, thank you for, twice reading the book. I was saying, I don't think I've done that.
No, I really enjoyed that book. And when I heard the audio narrative by Stephen Hogan, that was also beautiful. I just loved it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, good. I haven't listened, but I hear great things about it. I haven't listened because if I listen, I'll start to read my own work in his way. So I would just be very influenced. But he's a great actor. He's a great actor.
Yeah. And I feel terribly guilty about, disturbing you while you are writing. But this time,
the time of day is perfect. And I
so
thank
happy
you so much.
Spare time for us. Yeah.
Well, when you told me you read it twice and you'd listen to it, I was like, what can I do? That definitely deserves my time.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you shifting the time. I'm under a little pressure. I have to go in to see a theatre piece later. We're working on a film version of the novel, and there's just an interesting theatre piece going on in Dublin in connection with it. So I'm kind of dashing into town to do that. So, yeah.
So Audrey, the image of the island and the characters in your book that has stayed with me for a very long time, even after I'd finished reading the book. For the benefit of our viewers, could you please tell us a little about, the genesis of this novel or the inspiration behind this novel?
Well, firstly, thank you. I'm so delighted to join you, but also that it lingers with you is a gift to me. Yes, because I think because colonization lingers in us all, and those who have been involved in it. It's very important to create that sense of the aftermath, because we are all still in the aftermath of colonization and the structure of colonization. So how did it come to pass? It probably started when I was 13, which is some time ago now. And I went to France on an exchange program. And I landed into France. I had no French, and the family I was staying with for 3 weeks had no English. So I had this totally immersive experience, but immersive not only in language, but also in culture. And in the culture, it was a much more youth-based culture, in that all the youths kind of hung out on the beach, and we had, I was 13, it was beautiful, I'd go down and all the guys were playing in the boats, and, it was by the sea, and it was just beautiful. It was in Brittany, and it was beautiful, and it was a great 3 weeks. And I came back, full of a different world and a different way of seeing the world and a different way of being young, which was quite interesting. And back to this kind of 1970s Ireland. So 1979, really quite a dark place, still very much a Catholic country, still very much consumed by the Irish question, as the violence in Northern Ireland was really very intense over that summer. And it culminated in that summer of 1979 in the IRA blowing up the boat of Lord Mountbatten, killing him and his daughter's mother-in-law, and hugely, and I suppose existentially for me, 2 teenage boys. One of them was Lord Mountbatten's grandson, and the other was a young boy who was working on the boat. It was a summer job. They were 14 and 15. I was 13. So and I had been in this French environment where when you play on a boat as a kid, you just play on a boat. And then you come back to Ireland and you play on a boat and you're dead. And I know it's a hugely simplistic, if you like, approach, but it was the response of a child. And that really stayed with me because I needed to understand the violence. And I suppose the violence of Northern Ireland is the spine of the novel. I try and explore the impact of that violence, the legacy of that violence, but also the genesis of that violence. And the genesis of that violence, obviously you go back to, in particular, Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. And the impact of colonization living on through my childhood. And now, I suppose, as I try and process the impact of that violence into my adulthood and into my writing. So it was really, it came from that moment of trying to deal with that existential moment as a child, of being determined by this violence, because I was Irish. So as that was your Irish experience of childhood on boats, versus if I'd been in France only, I wouldn't have had that understanding of boys on boats. So I had this, in the one summer, from between June and August, I had this incredible experience of the difference your background makes, the difference where you land on this earth, what that makes to your life and to your understanding of the world. And I suppose that ends up being the time span of the book, that summer of 1979, from June to August, September. So that's really where it started.
Oh, yeah, I can connect with that completely, because like we also went in India, we went through the, same kind of colonization experience and the violence that was perpetrated by the, colonizers as well. So yes, I can totally understand where your book is coming.
And I think it was that. It's obviously about Ireland, but this is Ireland, if you like, was in many ways the template for the colonization that spread around the world. So when Henry VIII, the English were in Ireland, always have been, really, because we're neighbours, and they were then here for quite a long time, in quite a light way, in the Anglo-Norman kind of way. But it was with Henry VIII and Elizabeth I that things changed, and we had the plantations, and then that led to the laws around language and religion, and it was that kind of, if you like, redefining a country and redefining a territory, so that all the laws and language were changed to make it an English country, just as what happened in India. But what was interesting was Ireland was the first place really that this was done to in a very systematic way. Yeah. And then that was copied by the French, by the English, obviously themselves, and the Spanish, and it was brought around the world. And that's what makes this layer and this legacy of this particular colonization. There has always been colonization. There has always been invasion. There's always been countries taking over each other, or territories, or tribes, or whatever. But it was the strategic nature of this that was first created in Ireland and then brought around the world that actually in the end binds us. And it's a very interesting space, because to some degree Ireland is it's the European version of that. It's the white version of that. That then was transplanted around the world, whether it's Australia, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's India, Algeria, which also features in the novel, South America. It's all dealing with this, creating this linguistic and legal infrastructure that really thwarts the life underneath.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I can totally connect with that.
And we don't, because it's so in us, particularly now, you're like, well, what does it matter in Ireland? And it's like, well, kind of, we know all that. Why would you bother? But actually, it's those little tiny moments. So I say something as an Irish person, it's heard by an English person. An English person says something, and I hear it. And it's that moment, that space in between, us. And that
Yes.
is the legacy. In that space between us is the legacy of colonization, in terms of how I approach an English person, how an English person approaches me. And we have to unpick that and strip that away. We have to first understand it. And the novel is about, it's about really separating all that out so we can create the space where we see those tiny moments of
Yes.
interaction, and we feel the anger, the black humor. We feel that the attempts of one to kind of trump the other and, you know, take control of the other, which is at the core, you know, it's at the core of colonization, is one trying to be in charge and the other trying to get out from under that charge and that system. And that's taking generations to come out from under. Like, it's extraordinary how long that is taking. Even in Ireland, where we've had the Good Friday Agreement and we've had so many positive things, and then we had Brexit, not so positive. You know, it's taking generation after generation to come out from under that.
Yes, if at all. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to, you see, and that's where I'd be quite passionate about trying to find a way to do that, to try and find a new way of living, because that way of living is not a good way of living. You know,
Absolutely.
it's not a good thing to pass on to your children.
Yes.
You know, and so it's about finding the space to consider this and to think about this and to think about your relationship with your flag, your relationship with your language, your relationship with your landscape. What is that, and how has it been defined, and how has that been othered? You know, language is othered in that process of colonization.
Because we need to unstitch the controller and the controlled, that equation. We need to take it to another level, because we need to interact as equals, basically, instead of you know, the colonized and the colonizer. Because then we perceive whatever the colonizer says, our perception of that, and what we say, the perception of the colonizer, you know, all that. We need to
but it's very hard
that.
to do it. Yes, it's very hard to do it if you can't see it, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes in the book, you know, I deal with some actually very basic questions, because actually, you know, it's in its way, it's almost Socratic, because I've gone back to asking these really basic questions about what is a language, does it matter? Because actually we haven't answered them. You know, we've layered them in so much history and anger and narrative and theory, and you know, that actually we haven't answered those basic questions. So it's about stripping everything back, as you say, to find the essence of these moments of interaction, you know. And where better to do that but in a novel, where the characters can explore these things, you know, and it is about exploration and everybody coming to the table to explore, you know.
True, absolutely. So Audrey, about these two main characters in your book, I mean, basically Lloyd, the artist, who's a self-proclaimed Gauguin, and JP, the linguist, you know, out to preserve the Gallic diction. So how did you actually get into the skin of the artist? I can understand with JP's character, since you have degrees in French and German, so I can understand that perhaps building up JP's character might have come a little easy to you. But how did you get into the skin of the artist? I mean,
I know it's such a big question. And you're right, JP was a little easier because I did understand linguistics. I did understand that kind of concept of tracking language and demise in language. So you're absolutely right. Lloyd, the English artist, was much more difficult because I've never done art. I'm not an artist. So I went back and in my kind of reading, I went back to school art, and I did what would be here junior cert art. That would be like what art a child would do as a 15-year-old. And then in my reading, I was here in my study, but I graduated from that in my study to leaving cert or final year art. And really kind of started to just read around and then read artists' letters, read all the biographies of people like Cézanne, Gauguin, and obviously exhibitions. You know, and I spent a lot of time at a Gauguin exhibition in Basel in Switzerland to really immerse, because I knew he was central. Gauguin because Gauguin went in search of the authentic. You know, he went to Tahiti in search, just as Lloyd goes in search of the authentic. And you know, what does that even mean? You know, like, what does that even mean when you go in search of the authentic? What, you know, who is authentic? What is authentic? But to get into that, the character, finally, it was only when I was writing and I realized that an artist sees very differently from a writer, at least for me as a writer. And the artist, for me as a writer, I'm always kind of, you know, I come from journalism. I try to be objective, as I said earlier, just bring people to the table, bring people into a space where we find out what happens. But this artist wasn't like that. This artist, it's about him. And this artist thought himself like Rembrandt with all his self-portraits. And he kept putting himself into the scene. And once I realized that it was actually all about him, and it was his perspective on himself, then I realized I had, you know, so it was about the art in one way, but it was actually about seeing as an artist. And the kind of what became really clear when you read the work of artists and their biographies or their letters or their own writings is the ego is very, it's different from mine. I don't know whether it's different from all writers, and maybe there's a male thing in it too, but they very much put themselves at the center of so much of the work, because so much of the work is themselves in the work. So once I cracked that, then the writing kind of followed. But it was quite a journey, and it was an exciting journey, you know, because then you have these moments where it's the novel is written in this quite kind of removed way, but then suddenly you're into Lloyd's head and you're into Lloyd's perspective on the whole thing. So yeah, that was really fun to write, actually. It took me a few years to crack him to get that style, but once I got it, I had a great time writing, you know, turning the world.
Those bits you've written about self-portrait, you know, drowning one, drowning two, you know, that kind of inner monologue that is going on continuously. Yeah, that is really good.
And also, you know, there's a difference, because four of the characters have internal monologue. So you have Lloyd has his internal monologue, and Masson has his, and then Murray and James, two of the islanders, also have internal monologues. But it's quite interesting that the beginning, Lloyd's internal monologue is very fractured, you know, and it's broken because he's this Englishman arriving into this Irish space, uncertain of his safety even, and uncertain of how he's welcomed, whereas Masson arrives with this fluency, you know, he's Proustian. I know this, I have all these people love me, and he's so coherent. But actually, as the novel goes on, and as Lloyd finds his way through his art and through the language of art, he becomes more fluent. But as Masson kind of explores his own background and his relationship with his Algerian mother and his relationship with her Arabic hinterland, he becomes less, and he becomes more fractured. So that was really interesting how that kind of evolved. So I had fun with those two men, definitely.
In fact, you use this kind of sort of minimalistic kind of language, even when you're describing the violence, you know, the IRA violence. The short paragraphs and short sentences are there. You are interspersing your, you know, the rich lyrical narrative with those, you know, small episodes of violence. You know, that the juxtaposition also, the entire narrative stands out because of that, you know, because rich lyricism on the one hand, disjointed staccato, you know, references on one hand, and then the paragraph on the violence, So,
Yeah.
so did you think of this framework and sort of, or did it just come to you naturally? How did you
No.
go about it?
I'm going to admit that was really hard. It was really hard to find, because the violence is the spine of the novel. It is absolutely the frame of the novel. So the violence, as it unfolds in the novel, is written in the present tense, and they're written as kind of almost journalistic bulletins. They're almost kind of news reports of what happened.
Absolutely.
And they're written in the present tense because they still linger in us, of people who grew up with that background. But I really want to, and they are as they happened. So, it is absolutely the chronicle of the deaths of that summer. So it absolutely, those are the deaths that happened, and those are the times they happened at. So and I did it that way because one of the things I really wanted to understand was the impact on us of that puncturing of violence, that bump that we grew up with, where even though I was a distance from it, I was in the South, safe, not at all at risk of the violence, but it still determined you. That cutting into your day, it cuts into the imagined narrative. So you have this kind of life going on in the island, but this drumbeat of violence increases as the summer wears on, and it has greater and greater impact on the islanders, but also on Lloyd and Masson, until really you can't escape it. And that's what it was like for us actually that summer, culminating in that Mountbatten killing, when 18 British soldiers were killed in Warren Point on the same day. Like it was all building. So it's almost like a crescendo. It's a musical crescendo up to this point. So yeah, I mean, it was not there from the beginning. It evolved. Everything kind of evolves in my writing. I don't set out knowing. I work and work until I reach a point where I say, oh, that's what I need to do. That's the truth here. So it was that truth of the present tense interacting with the imagined narrative in the past tense, and the way they cut into each other. The violence cuts into the imagined narrative. So then that became very important to try and understand the determining nature of that violence, because it determined, bit by bit, the relationship between James, the young island boy, and Lloyd, the English artist. And it determined James's future. And, that's how it was for us. We were determined by that violence. You are determined by that violence. We look at the world right now and the countries that are being determined by violence. I mean, and you don't escape it, you never escape that determination. So I really wanted to understand that impact. And it's very much a novel from the southern perspective, so from the Republic of Ireland, where everything is at a distance. They're on the island, they're safe from the violence, as we were, but yet it's still determining. So and that's really, I think, the experience of so many people around the world,
right.
So.
Absolutely. And another thing was that I found your book visually very captivating. It was almost cinematic in the way, it was like a film running through my head when I was reading your book. So I could actually see and hear, things, the waves crashing against the cliffs. I could see the orange beak of the, puffins, everything, and the rabbits that James had trapped, and then he kills them, and that, spreading pool of blood, all of that. It was visually very, very riveting for me. So I was wondering, did this visual sort of way of writing, did it come to you naturally, or was it something you, adopted to make it more impactful?
You know, I don't think I set out that way. It kind of just happened, but I think it began when I was 16. And I was at school and I was doing, all the usual novels, the Jane Austens and the Dickens and Shakespeare, obviously, and obviously some of the Irish writers as well. And all this dense, no, not so much Shakespeare, but with all these big novels, all this dense description, and I know the writing is very beautiful and everything's great, but I was like, oh, right, okay. Until one day, and I understood then one day what my problem was when I read Marguerite Duras, the French writer, and this spare writing and this beauty and this space around the words. And I realized she was not telling me how to think. She was not telling me what to think. She was just creating a space for me as the reader to join the party and see what I thought.
Yeah.
And I really, as a 16-year-old, really appreciated that here I was reading this wonderful French woman and reading this novel in French, which probably made it even slightly more spare. And it's just, that clicked for me. That clicked for me as a reader, and I suppose that was, and then I became hugely interested in theatre. So I suppose rather than cinematic, I probably write more in a theatrical way where I try and pare everything back. So we are all in this together. I'm not telling you what to think. I don't care. But that does, what I mean is I don't care to tell you what to think. I just want to see if we can all find a new space. So it's more of a theatre piece. It's more like the German kind of Kammerspiel of a chamber piece where you go into the room and you're not let out until we finally come to the end of this and maybe we're in a new place. So it's Duras and then it's theatre and it's the two mixed together. But it's that sense of the reader being important. The reader is really important to my work because the reader, there's the work itself, there's the writer, and then the third leg of the stool is the reader. So we're all in this together. It's not, I don't have the answers. So first of all, I don't know. I am not an omniscient person. I'm just trying to figure it out myself. So, so it does invite you to go on a journey. Both books really start quite sparely in really very much letting you know that we're going on a journey here. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But we're going to go on a trip, so.
Yeah, you're right. Because with the ending, I think probably you left it open-ended. You left it for the reader to, interpret the ending, perhaps. Because, with the character of James, he's been abandoned by Lloyd.
Are we allowed to talk about the ending? Are we allowed to talk about endings?
No, I didn't get that.
I said, are we allowed to talk about endings?
Would you like to?
Oh, I don't mind. Your reader, your viewers, your listeners, your readers. I'm happy. I'm really happy to talk about the ending, but I think it's like warning. We're going to talk about the ending.
Yeah, probably it's going to be a spoiler. In that sense.
So okay, I'm really happy to talk about the ending, but I just think we should, put this alert on, and then we'll say, well, we've stopped talking about the ending.
All right. If you wish that. Okay, then about the women characters then. We have 3 generations of women, characters that you have portrayed here. One thing that I felt was that, except probably Mairead, I thought there was less focus on the inner thoughts and emotions of the women. They are stoic and accepting in nature, but that inner dialogue or monologue that we see in the male characters, that is not here, except in case of Mairead, when she's being painted by Lloyd. Then she's thinking about Liam, she's thinking about the future, she's thinking about how her essence will sort of be, portrayed in the painting and will go out and be exhibited, all of that. So was there a particular reason for making these characters a little, minimalistic vis-a-vis the male characters?
So there was colonization in Ireland by the English, and then we became independent, 100 years ago, and we set up our state. And as you can see happening in other countries in the world, particularly in Africa, setting up as an independent country is actually a very difficult space, because you're poor, you've no support, you've no infrastructure, you've no schools, you've no hospitals. And in Ireland, we turned to the Catholic Church, and we turned to the Vatican in Rome to help us. And they did. And they came and they very kindly set up schools and hospitals and set up a social and educational system. But as the years went on, that social and educational system became a really difficult space for many Irish women. Not all, some were very happy. But for many Irish women, this really what became almost, or it was, a theocratic state, a state run by a single religious belief. For a lot of women, this was an incredibly difficult space, because it not only did it control the schools and the hospitals and the social thinking, but it also controlled women's sexuality. And at the core of a lot of this trauma in the novel is that relationship for Mairead and her sexual being and her sense of herself. And I suppose we're looking at a generational shift where her mother and her grandmother don't really engage so much beyond the kind of accepted truths. And Mairead is this younger woman. She's a widow. She's very beautiful. She's a mother to James, and she is determined to stay on the island, but she wants to live on the island on her own terms. And she has a sexual relationship with Masson, the Frenchman. Yeah. And it was really important to me that was not an issue for her. She just had sex. She was an Irish woman in a novel just having sex. There was no trauma or drama about Mairead having sex. She just has sex. It's what she wants to do. She does it. The islanders turn a blind eye to this. They kind of know it's her bit of summer fun. It's not a big deal. Masson will go, and Mairead. And you think, oh, okay, well, it's Ireland. It's Ireland being liberated, and it's Ireland kind of accepting women's independence a little bit more, because here she is, a young woman, entitled to her own sexuality. But actually, as the novel goes on, you see that the islanders are actually not comfortable with Mairead's self-expression. And when she starts to use her body, not in a sexual way, but just to use her body as how she wants to use her body in her relationship with the artist, that's when the trouble starts for her. And that's when you see the forces of conventional Catholic Ireland coming against her. So she thought she was in a more liberal environment because she's having sex, but actually it kind of became clear in Ireland that just because you gained the right to have sex as you wanted, it didn't actually mean you're an independent woman. And Mairead really kind of, if you like, underscores that trauma of, oh, but I thought we were free now to have sex as we wanted to, but actually there are other layers of control and patriarchy, and it's not just the men, but it's the women who are of the previous generations who also exert that control. So, and I think it's kind of interesting because in my first novel, there's only a tiny fragment of interior monologue, and it's when the main character Peter starts to have a crisis about his relationship with Nazism and fascism. Yeah. But he doesn't have it nor does the female character, the principal female character in that novel, Katharina. He doesn't allow himself to consider, because actually he can't. And the women, Mairead's mother and grandmother, are in the same space. They don't allow themselves to consider because they can't, and they won't. That they just accept the inherited truth, whereas she tries to create a new truth, and it doesn't go well for her.
Right.
So if I can just backtrack on James, I'm really happy to talk about the ending. I'm really happy to. I'm just saying, if people didn't want to hear the ending, then we should probably let them know. But I think James is such an interesting character that, I'm very happy to talk.
I'll just go back to the interview we did last time. In that interview, you said that when you started the undertaking, when you started writing, you had a sense of what the beginning and the end would be. But in the case of the colony, you said that you knew the beginning, but you didn't quite know what the end would be. And I'll just quote what you said. You said, starting the colony without knowing the ending was quite a terrifying space for me. And I had to trust the writing process, believe I would eventually find what I was looking for. So I just would like to know, did you find what you were looking for? And what was it what was your quest about? So, yeah.
Gosh, that's a good question. Did I find what I was looking for? I think I found a space, I found a space to consider things, which I think was the ambition of the novel, and I hope that's what the readers find too. Truth, you're looking for truth, aren't you? I mean, that's at the core of why you undertake this work, is to find a truth.
Yes.
But I think I probably came back to where I started, and it's again back to my early reading, which was Christa Wolf, the German writer, in Nachdenken über Christa T, Reflections on Christa T, I think it's called in English, where she has this tiny phrase of extremen vermeiden, and it's avoid extremes. And she grew up within the framework of Nazi Germany, and then was part of Eastern Germany as during the communist regime. So she saw both extremes, and I suppose I came back full circle to that extremen vermeiden, avoid the extremes, even if it's difficult working in the gray middle. That's where we have to work, and that's where novelists have to work, is in the gray middle, where it's not black and white. So did I find what I was looking for? I suppose I explored the truth of the gray middle, and what it was like for ordinary people. And I think that's been the most wonderful thing about that, is the number of people who would say, this is what I've been thinking about, but I didn't know how to think about it. And that's the gift. If you create a frame for that, I don't necessarily have the answers or have the truth, but if you can create a space to consider that and to just stand back from it and breathe a little bit around that, it's almost like going on a yoga mat. To find a space to be still, to just allow this consideration. And it is a bit like that, well, what is the truth? Whose truth? My truth? What is my truth? Do I even have a truth? So did I find what I was looking for? Probably in that I found the grayness again, and it probably reaffirmed for me that extremen vermeiden, that there is, when we end up so polarized as we have been in Ireland, as is happening now, in just such horrific ways in Israel and Gaza. It's when we end up that polarized, you can't, there is no future in that level of
Yeah.
polarization. There just is no humanity. There is no human
Yes.
future for either
Yes.
side in that level.
Yes.
So it is extreme and vermeiden. It is bringing us all into that murky gray, and we just have to battle it out and do our best to listen, to interpret, and try and understand. And if I think if I came to the end having achieved that, then that was the truth I was looking for. That, it's in the middle somewhere. And
Okay. Yeah. So when we were talking about the end, just one little question here. When I was reading the last page or last couple of pages, we have James standing on the cliff and he's watching Lloyd leave. And he doesn't seem overly distraught. And then when you go back to the previous page, there is a conversation between him and JP. JP is saying goodbye to him. And he says, I'll see you in the spring. And James says that I wouldn't be here in the spring. I would have left. So, so there seems to be a possibility that James would find a way out of this island. So what just, made me wonder was that here, are we looking at a James who's trying to, cover his pain, the pain of abandonment? Are we looking at a James who is optimistic about the future and feels he'll find a way out of this place? Or are we looking at a James who is, very determined and ambitious to become an artist? So I was wondering, I mean, this is how I'm thinking, but I was wondering what was your, how you sort of framed the character and how you envisaged the ending to be? Or did you leave it for the reader to construe the ending in that sense?
So yes, it's for the reader. Both my books, it's kind of for the reader to figure out, because that's the process. But I suppose my take on James, who's a really heartbreaking character for me, beautiful 15-year-old boy, so full of potential, but impoverished. And because he is impoverished, he is dependent on Lloyd. And when you ask, what is he? He's a dependent. And not on his mother, because he's supposed to be able to provide for his mother, but on this English man who offers him a way out of poverty, a way out of being a fisherman that he doesn't want to be, and into this other world of art, and this other world and this other way of being. And James really wants this, but his only way to get this is through Lloyd. So therefore, when Lloyd breaks his promise, and when Lloyd steals James's ideas, James has no choice but to soak it up, because he is so dependent on Lloyd taking him out of there, off the island. So he is he calm? For me, he isn't calm, but he's trying to make himself calm so that he is acceptable to Lloyd still in the future, so that he doesn't kick up a fuss, so that he is taken off the island to go to art school, which is the dream Lloyd created for him, and then starts to take it away. Oh, the most cruel thing. So he's there trying to still himself to accept Lloyd going off without him. But he's on the cliff, and he's on the cliff in the way that the IRA man was on the cliff before detonating the bomb for under Mountbatten's boat. So James is standing on the cliff in exactly the same way as the man stood on the cliff with the detonation from Mountbatten's boat. James is there. He's trying to hold to this calm because that's going to be his way out. But then he goes back to the house, to the artist's studio, to find, okay, we'll just call it the ultimate betrayal. He has been betrayed.
Yes.
He has been betrayed by Lloyd. So are we looking actually at another recruit for Republican violence? Are we looking at a young man who becomes so angry that he then wants revenge against Englishness for a betrayal? But what are we looking at? You know, is this how you recruit? That you think of so many teenage boys around the world who become involved in these things because they're angry. They've been abandoned. They've been betrayed. Promises have been broken. And what happens when you do that to a 15-year-old boy? And James is my question about radicalization. You know, is this the moment you radicalize someone at that age, that gender, that betrayal? You know, and if that is, then let's recognize it and not do it again. You know, that this is a sensitive boy who has given himself to this man who then betrays him. So what is that legacy? So therefore you're looking again, is that how it goes on? Because you need new recruits, you need new young men to go out and plant bombs and shoot people. And so, you know, when you have power, use it well, you know, and use it quickly.
Yes.
You know?
James, in fact, was my favorite. I mean, the character I loved the most in the book. Yeah. It was very sad the way he's betrayed. But thank you so much for that.
He does break my heart. He does, even now, even still, because there are so many. There are so many young Irish boys who are like him, you know, of my age. You know, and there are young boys like that around the world, and you know, and also COVID. You know, COVID is another generation of young men, abandoned, you know, and forgotten, and you know, it's a very precious age in boys and girls, but it definitely can end up in violence in boys, you know, in different ways.
So Audrey, thank you so much. You've taken time out of your very, very busy schedule and spoken to us about your wonderful book. We wish you the best in all your literary pursuits. And I'm hoping you get the Booker Prize with your third book. And not that you need a stamp of a literary prize to prove your credentials as a great writer. We already know you are one. So thank you so much, Audrey, for talking to us.
The pleasure has been absolutely mine. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much, Audrey.
And thank you for your time.
It was my pleasure. Delight. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you so much again.
Bye-bye.